Welcome to the Commercial Real Estate Academy podcast, the podcast dedicated to simplifying the commercial real estate industry for the masses. Each week, we sit down with industry experts to dissect the many facets of commercial real estate and extract valuable lessons you can apply to your business. Whether you're a new or seasoned business owner or investor, the Commercial Real Estate Academy podcast will be your go-to resource for all your commercial real estate needs. Now, here are your hosts, Raphael Collazo and Jeff Walston.
Welcome to the Commercial Real Estate Academy podcast. I'm your host, Raphael Collazo, here with my co-host, Jeff Walston. How's it going, my friend?
It's going wonderful. Such a beautiful day here in Kentucky. It's finally summer. It's definitely warmed up around here. Business is going great and everything's going well. How about you, Raphael? How's it going over there?
Yeah, can't complain, man. Just keeping busy with the business. And then, as you know, I'm getting married in November. So just trying to take care of some items ahead of that date. And we have the bachelor party coming up and everything else. So, it's going to be a eventful next few months. And really just speaking of an eventful time and just a great discussion, we had a phenomenal conversation with Aaron Strauss, who's the managing partner of AY Strauss LLC, located in New Jersey. And they also have an office in New York City as well. Just a great conversation. He's a lawyer that specializes in the commercial real estate industry. And he as his firm has continued to grow, he started to branch out in a variety of different parts of law. But what we talked about primarily during the conversation that we had was pertaining to his practices focused on the commercial real estate industry. So we touched on what got him interested in the commercial real estate industry to begin with. He started his law firm in the midst of the recession in 2010. So obviously we talked about why he decided to do that and some of the struggles he faced early on. We also talked about some of the common pitfalls that he sees, investors make as far as, the acquisition side of things. There's emotions involved, in particular, if you're just getting started in the business and investing, that he says need to be quelled to make sure that you're making the right decision in each scenario. Along with that, we talked on some of the legal risks from a construction angle. He actually has a staffer on site that's all they focus on is the construction side of the business. And, he alluded to why that was the case and why someone who's looking for legal representation in the construction space would do well to go to affiliate with an organization that has someone in that capacity, that they just focus on that one thing. And then finally, we touched on some of the things related to when it's right to go into a litigation scenario. Obviously, it's not for everyone and it shouldn't be taken lightly, but there may be situations where it may be wise for you to pursue litigation in a transaction as well. So it was just a very engaging conversation. We had a lot of analogies being thrown around, which was really great. And he truly is an entrepreneur. And it's always great to talk to other entrepreneurs and, get an understanding of their struggles and their thought process as they would continue to grow their organization. So I got a lot of value from the discussion. What do you think, Jeff?
Same. I couldn't agree more. Gained a lot of value from Aaron and just about entrepreneurship and how to grow that. And then particularly on law, that he gives us tidbits and facts and stuff that you guys hopefully can gain value from. And I look forward to hearing your guys' feedbacks. And I just wanted to also say we appreciate all the 5-star reviews that you've been giving us. We highly, highly appreciate it. And looking forward to even more. If you're listening to this podcast, hopefully you can, once you're done with it and you like it, give us a 5-star review. It's really, really helping us out, gain more viewers. And because this is what it's all about, guys, that we're trying to give back to everyone out there and to help you with the knowledge in the commercial real estate sector. So we really appreciate it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And really, like Jeff said, we're humbled by the reaching out that we've gotten and just the insights that we've gained from you guys as well. So if you guys don't mind, take a few seconds, go to Apple Podcasts, and please just leave us a 5-star review. It makes a huge difference, and we've seen a significant uptick in our downloads as a result of that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into the episode. Well, hey, Aaron, great to see you this fine afternoon.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on the podcast today.
Yeah, we're excited to have you on.
Definitely. Yeah. And Aaron's tuning in from New Jersey. So it's been a while since I've been out there, but I'm looking forward to get out there. Hopefully maybe even this year, if not for sure next year. I got several buddies in New York City and just, not too far away from you. So.
Perfect.
Yeah. So first off, we're just honored to have you. I know we've had back and forth discussion with your team for a little while, and we're really excited to dive into your backstory because I think it's going to be really interesting. And I know the listeners are going to gain a lot of value from it. So to start off, what we typically like to do is learn a little bit more about the person that's across the table from us. So if you don't mind kind of sharing your backstory, I think that'd be helpful.
Sure. I grew up in Queens, New York. Went to schools in Queens and then high school, college, law school, all in New York City. So really from the city. And then when I got an opportunity after law school to work at a big firm in New York City, I jumped at it. It was very exciting to work on these very large institutional deals and international firm, very prestigious. But um, I always had this entrepreneurial itch. And I thought, wow, this is great learning experience. It's great credentialing, great client exposure, very exciting work. But an interim step, I moved from New York, New Jersey in that firm. It was an opportunity in the New Jersey office. They offered me, and I said, sure, given that kid from Queens got used to hearing all the planes, trains, traffic jams. I mean, it was just so loud. So I jumped at the opportunity and moved to the burbs. And I've been living in the burbs in New Jersey for probably 18 years now, but still work in the city, probably half my time. But basically, after 3 years at a very large international firm where I gained a lot of valuable experience, and I think it's really great from an exposure standpoint to see how deals are done at the highest level, because you just learn certain things by the way people carry themselves and handle themselves, and the business deal makers. You just learn from them and the gravitas that they bring. So I really enjoyed it. I'm very thankful for that experience. But I decided the next stop for me should be at a firm where I can be more client direct facing. Because if you're a junior person at a very large firm and the deal is hundreds of millions of dollars, you're really, really low on the totem pole, which is fine. And then it takes many years to advance to actually run deals. So I took a jump to a large New Jersey firm, a firm that's been around a long time, terrific firm. I was there for almost 6 years. And that firm, a lot of what I did focused on the middle market. So it was dealing more closely with the clients, the entrepreneurs. They had some institutional clients, which was great exposure too. But the firm was such that, it was a small, tight-knit department, great culture, great group. And while I still always have a ton to learn, it was a great just learning culture. So it was a good vibe, good energy, good client base, and really enjoyed it. And after about 6 years, decided that it was time to do my own shop. I always sort of had the urge to, run my own show, for better, for worse. And I found that I was actually really good at building those relationships with those clients. So I was good at, for whatever reason, convincing the clients that I'm a good person to team up with and that we can represent them. So 2010, which was a really, really tough market for commercial real estate, because it was really on the heels, if not technically still in the Great Recession, I started this firm, A.Y. Strauss, and it's been a very great ride. There's a lot of ups and downs and highs and lows, as any entrepreneur will tell you. But the thing that keeps me going is that I do believe with a lot of conviction that there's a lot of demand out there for a talented boutique firm to do really sophisticated work with a great culture. And that's my conviction every day. So from 2010 to 2022, we've grown the team from, it started just me on the phone and basically a couple clients, to a team of around 25 people, where now we're doing more than just traditional commercial real estate deals. We're also doing litigation and bankruptcy, restructuring, franchising, labor and employment. And we're still admittedly in a growth stage where we're trying to develop our core and build off of the successes we've had for our clients to develop to that next level, what I call a right-sized boutique, to handle most of what these mid-market companies need on a day-to-day basis. But critically, above all else, is to keep that wonderful culture we've developed, great people and having each other's backs and so on and so forth. And my job every day is varied. It involves talking to the clients, overseeing some deal flow, meeting new clients, marketing, recruiting. It's just a hodgepodge, but I'm happy doing it. So I really appreciate the opportunity to tell our story. And thanks again for having me.
Oh, absolutely. And you just spoke to the I guess the entrepreneurs out there, because you do wear a lot of hats, and obviously as you're starting to grow and expand your firm, your role is going to evolve, and you're going to have to bring in people that are going to be able to fill in the pieces that used to be maybe housed or used to operate, and it just continues to grow over time. So, obviously, we love interviewing entrepreneurs, especially those that are focused in the commercial real estate space. So we're honored to have you, really.
Yeah,
Yeah, likewise,
absolutely.
too. So you empathize, you've had your ups and downs, highs and lows,
Mhm.
and your great day and worst day could be mixed into one in any given day, and you're just trying
Yeah.
it's never a dull moment, let's put it that way. But you're right, wearing a lot of hats and always having a sense of optimism and focusing on the positive and moving forward above all else. Those are the key themes, I think, that generally drive entrepreneurial businesses.
Absolutely. And
Absolutely.
I'll even add the regulation of emotion when it comes to these types of things as well, because, I can only imagine starting an enterprise in 2010, like you said, in the midst of the recession, going from what I would imagine would be a pretty lucrative position that you had before to one that is pretty much you're responsible for everything, and that's something that I was in consulting, but I was in the tech side. So I was a developer and consultant. And when I made the jump to brokerage, it was that similar type of, evolution of my understanding that, you kind of eat what you kill. You get out there, you have to produce for yourself. And that is a skill that you have to develop over time. It's not something that at least my belief is that you're not innately born with it. There's people who are maybe more, lean more towards that side than others, but it's still a skill you gotta develop. So
100%. Someone told me recently that, look at things happening in the broader world, like inflation and different pricing issues and market and so on. And they said, look, when there's a downturn or there's difficulty, it's a time to focus on value. And some of the best businesses will start in downturns. So for people who are very nervous, maybe they were crypto and they're getting hammered or God knows what, it's actually, if you can focus on the positive and the long term, if you do focus and start a business at a downturn, it's actually a wonderful opportunity because there's only one way to go up, just keep moving. And that's in a weird way, contrarian way, it's actually not a bad thing. And you're forced in a downturn to create value and not fiction. And you're focused on that value. And if you can build it then you could certainly build it in better times. So for good or bad, there's always hopefully a positive way to look at the situation.
Absolutely. I commend you for starting a new company right after the recession there. I actually had an 8-year company that the recession took because I was primarily in, so I'm a general contractor, commercial general contractor now, but previously I was a home builder. And so during that time, it really had all the savings and everything, and that just pretty much took everything. So I was like, well, I don't know what I'm doing here, but I'm definitely not starting another company because I don't have any money to even do that, and nor where do I go. So, but I definitely commend you on that for sure. So earlier you're speaking of deals, and particularly you're alluding to the commercial deals and stuff. So what actually got you interested in that side, like the business, the commercial real estate, business deals and such?
Sure, and I appreciate the question. I've always had a fascination with commercial real estate. I really like the law in the sense it's a way to balance sort of business and I don't say academics because it's the wrong way of thinking of it, but almost like a strategic way of thinking. So the line between business and law is sometimes razor thin. And oftentimes when it comes to running a deal, it blurs and it doesn't even exist. So I like the idea of applying interesting I don't want to say theories, but interesting concepts that are relevant that need to be in place from a deal, and sort of like a chess pieces. You have to move them along, but with an eye towards making the business deal happen. So I've always been drawn to commercial real estate. I love the deal making. I love the energy. I love players. I love the strategy. I like the excitement of a real asset you can touch and feel. And I loved, the other day I toured a development site with a client in New Jersey. It was just exciting to see his plan for what he wants to come up out of the ground and tying up different parcels and the strategy of why we talk to one owner first and how this one plays into that. And actually walking the street of where this future site is going to be was very exciting. And I like the stories behind it too. It's very interesting for me.
Yeah, and I'm sure growing up in New York probably played a part in that as well, I imagine, because it's the built environments all around you. So just kind of seeing that evolution over time, and I'm not too sure what the evolution has been in Queens or even other boroughs within New York City, but I'm sure over the last 20, 30 years, it's just been a continual growth pattern. So
it is amazing to have grown up in the New York Metro and to be a kid that grew up on the subways and to walk the streets of the city and to hang out in the city. It was kind of intoxicating in the sense that you see the architecture, you see the infrastructure, you see the way a city runs. And it is interesting in the sense that from a valuation perspective, a lot of clients have left the city, left New York City for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But I was just sitting with some clients yesterday who are buying very actively in New York, and that's sort of a contrarian play right now, obviously depending on the asset class. But the truth is that infrastructure is very hard to just pick up and move to some other city nationally. Very hard to take culture and drop it somewhere else. And I think cities always gone through a lot of ups and downs, but it has a deep character. You walk Central Park, it's intoxicating. It's just an amazing vibe. Doesn't feel the same that it did a few years ago, the city, but there's an ebb and flow. And I agree that if Silicon Valley is to tech, New York City historically has been for real estate, even though it's obviously struggling in many ways right now.
Definitely. No. And I'm hopeful for New York City's future as far as, the bouncing back to what it was pre-COVID, because I was there last year in October for a conference. And like you said, it just didn't have the same feel as of yet, but I am very optimistic about the future of New York City. And I'm sure a lot of people in the city are as well. But one thing I wanted to ask you was, you mentioned the entrepreneurial itch that you've had, and a lot of people who listen to this podcast they themselves have that itch as well. So could you kind of talk to us a little bit about what made you decide, hey, you know what, it's my turn to, take the entrepreneurial leap, and maybe talk a little bit about some of the early struggles, because you mentioned 2010, that's probably one of the, as far as the real estate's concerned, that was probably one of the most, crisis heavy periods of real estate in the last 100 years. So if you could kind of touch on that, I think that'd be great for our audience.
Yeah, appreciate it. And those were very dark days, admittedly. I luckily had a few clients that I had built relationships with that were active. Certain asset classes tend to, I wouldn't say recession proof, because nothing really is immune from, interesting market conditions. But at a certain point, if you've bought for a long time, you've bought in a relatively stable asset class, say, for example, multifamily, and you're working with regional local banks who are committed to lend and back those local communities, there's sort of always a counterplay, right? So if you were deeply involved in the CMBS world at that time and it completely imploded, and you were associate number 57 at an institutional firm representing institutional banks, it was very hard to find a job at that time. But a lot of wealth in real estate is also created by family offices or multi-generational businesses or up-and-coming entrepreneurs. And if anything, in a tricky market or as a hedge against inflation or anything else going on, people always have a desire to own and control bricks, because it's just a piece of your portfolio that can always be either a hedge or income, frankly. So stock market's great. It obviously has created a lot of wealth and will continue, and you should always be invested. But if you're collecting rent and you're covering your debt service, it's real income, real cash you can live on. So even though things were dark and banks for the most part were inactive, there were pockets of activity that just absolutely never stopped. So I think starting in that economic climate and seeing what the clients wanted during those early days and seeing what we could or could not service really powered a lot of my thinking over the last decade to try to build, frankly, to where we are now. So when we first started, it was really just me on the phone. So we can do your deal, acquisition, your finance, your lease. But I wasn't a litigator. So if somebody wanted to buy a note and try to take control of the asset, well, I can represent you buying the note, but I didn't have a litigation department. Or I wasn't a bankruptcy lawyer who was specializing in the nuances of how bankruptcy may or may not play into foreclosure. There were many things that I just didn't have the expertise. But starting in that down market, in that down cycle, and seeing what things could look like in dark days, always fed my vision to try to hire and bring in those folks who could be ready for when different economic times go up or down. So we've recruited around those bases. And also, I like to think if we had the team we had today when I first started, we'd be significantly larger, because all of those opportunities in those early years, we just couldn't service. And we also are very small, so there's execution risk. So it's a weird dynamic when you're starting a firm or any other business where in the earlier years, you could have theoretically been more successful on another platform and a million opportunities you've lost, but you hope to sort of regain them in the latter years as you build up and pick up speed. So that's an awkward dynamic of starting a business at any time.
Yeah, but and I appreciate that insight, because it is. I mean, you're right. When you look back and you see what you've built thus far, and you place it back in that period of time, obviously with the skills that you've developed now, then ultimately you could have achieved a higher level. But through that, it's an evolution. I feel like with
Yeah.
entrepreneurship, like you're not the same person you are today than you were in 2010, and I'm sure that's part and parcel because you've had to, you know, be creative about ways to handle different scenarios. And over time, you've built out your structures, you built out your team, and now you have a high performing organization. And, you know, as you mentioned before, the future opportunities are great because, you know, great times don't last. We're already kind of seeing some fracturing, quote unquote, of, you know, the economy, as people are saying. So who knows if in the next 2 years there's another opportunity that presents itself that you guys can capitalize on immensely. So
Yeah, well said. I think, Raphael, the key point is in entrepreneurship is, you basically think you're starting a business and you're in control. You're in control of different things, but it's how you react to things out of your control is what makes you actually into an entrepreneur. So anybody could write the business plan and anybody could say, this is what I want to do, but 2 or 3 years into it, you have no idea what's happening. That business plan, basically every year, it's a relic come the beginning of the year. And based on a million things happening in the economy, the labor market, you name it. I mean, and it's also just you build a mental toughness. Somebody told me once, and it's awful, like a kind of an awful analogy for entrepreneurship, but I think about it from time to time. Someone said that like starting a business, it's like you're riding on a tiger. Everybody's looking at you that you're just some big shot. Oh my God, that guy's riding a tiger. That's the coolest thing in the world. But you're thinking, how the hell did I get on this tiger and have it off without dying? It's like
yeah,
the pressure every day is great. It is real. So you need to have balance in your personal life, whether you meditate, you hang out with your kids, hang out with your friends, talk to your wife, whatever it may be. The mental and emotional aspect of it, I think, is like 99%. I have no problem doing the hard work that needs to go into it every day. But like you mentioned in the beginning part of the call, it's maintaining that mental toughness and that conviction that even on your darkest day, you're on the right track because everyone around you is doing so many other cool things. And it's easy just to chase the shiny object on the side of the road or pursue some massive pivot. But the greatest value, the greatest intrinsic value is sticking to your conviction over a longer period of time because things take a long time, way beyond the scope you thought. And sometimes people just give up before they're about to break out. And we certainly had tons of challenges over the years, without question. And we will continue to have tons of challenges. But the one thing I don't think we'll lack from is just the sense of constantly trying to move forward. You always need to be moving forward.
awesome, great insight, really.
Yeah. And kind of speaking of that, I know earlier you were discussing value and how you hired for more value to give to your customers and to be able to execute more business deals and such. So my question is what is the value proposition that AY Strauss gives to their clients? Can you kind of walk us through some?
Sure. I appreciate that question. It's a great question. And the truth is, it's easy to take an industry like the law and just commoditize it. How
Yeah.
much, how fast. Every client assumes that it's going to be 100% correct, by the way. They just want to know how
Yeah.
much, how fast. But my core belief is if you could bring a great team together and motivate that team and have a great culture and take care of your people, they're going to take care of your clients. Literally, right before I got on this call, I called the client. We're closing a deal tomorrow. And I said, just FYI, the bill is going to be X. He said, Aaron, I already committed. And for the record, not every client is like this. It's like I already
Yeah.
committed to say to myself, whatever the bill is, it's paid. It's more than deserved. It's more than fair because your colleague did such a good job and made me feel as if I was right. Her only client interaction. And my belief is if you can provide that exceptional service and you keep eliminating any and all reason why somebody wouldn't be thrilled to work with you, you're going to be successful. It may not fall on the same day. It may take several years, but if you can keep eliminating one by one, step by step, to the extent humanly possible, all the relative pain points, you're going to have success. So obviously you need to answer for quality. It's like running a restaurant. If you don't provide wonderful quality food, you can't be in business, even if the service is great. But on top
Yeah.
of that, the service has to be really, really strong. You need to have depth of a team. So if someone's out for a week, you can cover so that somebody's not chasing somebody down because you're too busy. We've always tried our best to hire slightly in advance of a need, because the worst thing you can do is, I'm sorry, I'll get it to you in a week. Clients just don't want to wait. Even the ones that say that it's not a rush, they're always watching the clock. In my experience, they're watching the quality, they're watching the bill, they're watching the clock. But if you can make them feel from a service perspective that they're your only client, they'll come back to you again and again and again. And you keep looking to expand your team with people who have that desire to service, which is very rare, and have the skill set to get it done, and who fit the culture. So you're really looking for a lot of needles in the haystack, but if you find them, you hang on to them for dear life, and you try your best to continue to add and grow in that fashion. So I wouldn't say it's one differentiating factor. A lot of firms will say similar things, but is trying to lock down our culture, do a fantastic job, keep the range of rates within normal, right? Because as long as very big firms are open, our rates are going to be very competitive against those firms. And be what I call the Goldilocks firm. Some firms are too hot, some firms are too cold. We want to really try to be that just right organization, which is a work in process every single day.
Definitely. I love the analogy, by the way, the Goldilocks
the Goldilocks,
organization. Yeah, that makes sense. And you're right. I mean, I feel like in any industry, when your commitment to the client is of the utmost importance, is to make sure that they understand that they're being serviced to the highest level possible. And that lends itself to value, because if you provide that level of service, the price at which you can charge oftentimes is higher than what you see in lower priced options, because the value matrix in their mind is kind of aligned. So I couldn't agree more. Go ahead.
One more thing on the point, the reason why these big firms are able to charge a fortune, not only that brilliant, talented lawyers and wonderful brands built up over many years, what the client is really paying for, or perhaps paying a premium for, however you want to describe it, they're really paying for certainty of execution. If you really think about it, they're buying an insurance policy that they basically, but for some catastrophic element of the business deal that cannot close, they're buying certainty of execution. So for example, if you stay at a 5-star hotel versus a 1-star motel, you know that you're going to have wonderful room service. You know the Wi-Fi is going to work. You know you're going to have beautiful conference rooms. You just know it's going to be a wonderful experience. So people will pay 5 times more than they'll pay at the 1-star. I'm not suggesting we're a big firm and every single issue is resolved, but aspirationally, if you can keep checking off every reason why somebody would not want to deal with you, and you can be honest and transparent, you're going to have success as long as you show up every day and you continue to care.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
So I like how you
go ahead.
I like how you earlier you were talking about you're building your team around your core values and the company culture. I think that's some key ingredients to giving that value for sure. I just wanted to point that out because you alluded to that several different times, and that I really like that. And that's what it takes to give that customer satisfaction, that customer value, like you said, to get them to keep coming back. So
definitely.
Yeah. And it took a while. A lot of people think culture is nonsense and it means something different to everybody. Sometimes if you're not even expressing your culture is just a collection of what people think it is. It is what it is. You can change it good or bad. But if you try very hard to imprint these values and hire on those values, you have a shot, because especially in a business like law where there's no non-compete and law firms aren't sellable assets, like even accounting firms or a dental practice or a construction firm, the only thing you actually can't sell is the culture. The culture is the way you're feeling every day vis-a-vis internal and external ingredients. So we really try to focus on things like empathy, spirit of generosity. Will you have our back? Are you going to strive for that great client service? Do you care about the quality of the product? You can't make it up. You either have it or you don't, but we really, really try to push it and really try to hire around it, because otherwise you just have a collection of people who, may or may not be striving together. And it's really, you'd really got to aim for one firm, one team, or I think you don't really have a shot.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Couldn't agree more. So one of the things that you mentioned, obviously, as you've grown as a firm, you've expanded the different services that you provide to the marketplace. And what our audience ranges in I guess diversity, as far as we have brokers that listen to us, we have investors, developers, really just a broad range of individuals within the commercial real estate space. So one thing I wanted to ask you was, what are some of the legal pitfalls that you see during the acquisition process of real estate that you typically advise your clients to steer clear from?
It's a great question, and it's a little bit tricky to answer because every deal is sort of a little bit different in the framework of the client, but oftentimes if it's a client starting out, they could be very hungry just to close that first deal. And you could sense they may want to make the deal almost happen from an emotional perspective, like they get attached emotionally to a transaction when somebody's really just starting out, or perhaps they'll struggle tremendously raising the equity for a deal where they'll put under contract and they'll strike out really trying to raise the equity before they've had some soft commitments. We've seen deals go south for a million different reasons. It's hard to say, like there's specific themes, but generally speaking, there's always wacky things that could pop up in a diligence, whether it's environmental or title or survey or any other zoning issue that affects the asset. But I think if people have a long-term conviction to invest, they're transparent with their investors, they're not jumping into a pile of liability, and they're negotiating their contracts properly. And it's okay to take plenty of risk on the contract. That's not my point, but to take risk that's beyond the scope of what they think their investors could or should bear, I think that's a potential pitfall. People walk a fine line, wanting to close, want to close, they want to get their property under contract, and they want to get it under closing. They want to get the closing done because it's so hard to find and it's so competitive. So sometimes in the heat of the moment, people can make decisions that in retrospect, maybe they wish they could have done differently.
Definitely. Yeah. And you alluded to, the other people's money situation as well, because you when you do involve other people's money in a transaction, you become a steward to that as well. So, I imagine as you start formulating the operating agreement and other functions within the actual execution of that particular transaction, you always have to look back and say, okay, am I being the best steward to those individuals' money? And I imagine if you have a level head on your shoulders, you can hopefully avoid some of the legal pitfalls that could have arise if you were to make a decision based just solely on emotion, like you said. So,
but I will say too, to the credit of all of our clients and all those entrepreneurs listening and all these up and comers, dealing with your lawyers. I mean, our job is not to, push you to make a deal. I mean, we're there to protect you. Sometimes our best clients will say, look, spell out the risk, speak in plain English, tell me what the worst case scenario is, and they make the call saying we're doing it. And that's a wonderful relationship. Our job is to just paint the picture, but you need to pull the trigger. And that happens every day, and that's to be encouraged. And again, it's about having that conviction and weighing the risk. And I think the best lawyers and best law firms will move from legalese and theory into really breaking down in practice what's the actual likelihood. And the best advisors, whether they're accountants, environmental consultants, lawyers, what have you, they're really talking to the business people in the language that they'll understand. We're not going to underwrite risk for a dollar basis, but if you start talking about environmental risk and what's the expense and what's the exposure, or an easement that affects 10 feet of your property, it's hard to value it sometimes from an underwriting perspective, and appraisals have value in that context. But it's just walking through that, again, like we talked about in the very beginning, that razor thin line between legal and business, and say, hey, what's really going to happen here? And allow the client to make the call versus scaring them to a point where everything, because honestly, every deal before you close is the scariest thing of all time. You ultimately do have to get over those hurdles and work with your professionals to understand what risks to disclose to your different fiduciaries, whether it's your lenders, whether it's your investors, whether it's your partners, and then being okay to pull the trigger, because it's a great asset, and over time, that risk will be offset by the benefit you'll ultimately gain.
Definitely.
Oh, without a doubt. So, since you did the legal pitfalls and some of those common issues, I've kind of, since I'm in the commercial general contracting and construction sphere, what are some that's on the construction side of things that you guys in your firm, or you in particular, that you see that goes through on a project itself? Can you kind of?
Sure. I mean, I will say one of my partners does construction contracts all day, and they're very, very intricate, and they're very, and you can't work with somebody who's dabbling in construction contracts. It's almost not even worth it, the paper it's written on. One of the agreements we're actually talking about internally at the office is in connection with a massive overlay of an overpass between two buildings in Brooklyn. I mean, it's a really complicated construction agreements with all sorts of big firms going on in the mix. They're very nuanced. What we have learned is construction projects are rife with a million ways for people to land in trouble because everything costs more and takes twice as long as they originally anticipated. You guys know from the business. And properties can get leaned up, subs can sometimes not get paid, and obviously costs of goods and materials and everything else is rapidly rising. So I think it's the type of thing, as you become more experienced, you learn from your underwriting how to approach it. From the legal perspective, make sure that whoever you're working with has expertise in construction contracts and is not dabbling in that. Because again, we have one person on our team, that's all he does. Construction projects around the country, all day, all night. Not every real estate lawyer is well versed in all the intricacies of whether or not to use the AIA form with a rider, if you should customize something, if you should use a short form, long form. There's just so many nuances. And again, it's the type of thing where you may or may not need the contract because it all works out well, but given the construction industry as a whole and all those rife issues that will apply, it's one thing that's good to invest in a good contract up front.
Definitely. Yeah. And as you alluded to, there's so many moving parts. So, a lot of times if you don't work with someone who is of that caliber, if someone who's just solely focused on those types of projects, some things may be missed. And if you're talking about some of these large construction projects, hundreds of millions of dollars, it can make a big impact on the bottom line as well. So
100%. And sometimes these smaller companies, we've seen one page or, really, really small contracts. We've seen things that don't say much, and that's often a problem too,
Yeah,
definitely. No, for sure. So one of the things we wanted to touch on a little bit is related to, obviously the worst case scenario. You never want to get to this point, but in a situation where, litigation may be the option, how do you work with your clients to determine whether or not it is a route that they should pursue in any particular scenario?
It's a great question. And the truth is right now we have a lot of litigation files going on in our firm, and a lot of them stemming from commercial real estate, where maybe some partner in a partnership says, hey, I didn't really get my distribution. What's going on? I'm worried about what's happening here. And this person taking their promote, or a partner in several buildings wanting to get out of those partnerships for a variety of reasons, or somebody said they're going to sell a property and they don't, and they're in litigation for specific performance. The case going on now is somebody exercising an option to purchase in a lease. There's just a million fact patterns where real estate, given the enormous value created and bundled in these assets, sometimes litigation is justified to right or wrong. And we obviously have a lot of other general litigation files going on, not tied to commercial real estate. But in any event, my personal view is litigation in a perfect world should be a last resort. It shouldn't be option A in your arsenal. There's a lot of cost and a lot of pain and a lot of time that could be triggered by litigation. So ideally, again, like we talked about underwriting value and exposing the risk, ideally, you want to, whether you're right or wrong, sometimes litigation could be over, I'm making up a number, $20,000. By the time you pay the lawyers, you could have lost money. Sometimes cases just don't justify litigating at all costs. And sometimes on principle, people will say, I want to litigate, and we'll almost do our absolute best to help them avoid that dynamic. But what you really want to do is you want to map out what the strategy is, right? You want to come up with your end game, whether it's specific performance you're suing under to buy that asset, or, we don't do a lot of land use here, but, suing a town to permit under the zoning code would otherwise be permitted to build 650 apartments with enormous value. At a certain point, it becomes part of your cost analysis. It becomes just one tool in your toolkit that you may or may not use to strategically reach your goals. And sometimes litigation may be necessary where it's an actual sort of binary issue. Did you have the option to purchase? Was it executed or not? I believe it was, and you owe me 10 million. I believe it wasn't, and I'm not selling this to you, and I'm saving 10 million, basically. So if the issue is very binary and it's really a butting heads and 100% disagreement, and there's no other way, and even within litigation, there's a million spheres, there's mediation, there's arbitration, and so on and so forth. What you want to avoid is somebody unwittingly entering into a war when they thought that they were going to go to a little skirmish on the edge of town. And you have to make sure that the client has all of their options laid out for them. They've done everything possible to reach their goals before actually filing suit. and they're fully aware of the many which ways it could go wrong and the cost that which could run over potential years before they go down that battlefield. And for some players, been around the game a while, they know how to use litigation, just a tool in their arsenal. But for somebody who has not entered into litigation, they could be very shocked by the cost. It's, if you're a deal maker, you're almost telling your real estate lawyer what you want. This is the range of costs. I'm doing this deal, the financing, you underwrite. But once you enter into the world of litigation and courts and their timeline and lawyers and motions and theories of law and choice of law, you're in a whole Byzantine world, and you need to be well advised before you enter into that sphere, because of a million ways it could go sideways, up, down, left, or right. And it's sort of a scary game once you're in that world. So you have to be very careful and cautious, and you have to be prudent if you're a lawyer to caution the client really in advance what they're walking into potentially.
Definitely. No, I appreciate that. And similar to what you had mentioned before, I mean, it's like pride a lot of times in situations where, we had a handshake agreement, or this has happened, and you quote unquote did not live up to your obligation. A lot of times I've even seen it, and we haven't been in any legal litigation or anything like that, but I've had in the past seen where people get all worked up over something that in retrospect is very small, but because of the fact that this was said and it wasn't lived up to, the looming threat of litigation is always thrown out there. But in reality, like you mentioned, it is not something to be taken lightly because of the fact that it could be very expensive, drawn out. And is it really even worth the pursuit of that, even though you may be right and you may ultimately, quote unquote, win a court victory, but is it ultimately going to move you forward in the direction that you want to be in? So I appreciate the insights you shared.
And certain people are litigious in nature and say, you know what, I want to develop the reputation that you don't mess with me. I'm buying deals in this area and I'm the man, and don't want anybody coming close to me. And if you mess with me, you're going to get hit by a lawsuit, and I don't care the cost, because it's my personal brand that I don't want to mess with him because he's going to go to the wall for what he believes in. So at a certain point, yes, you don't want to have that Pyrrhic victory or not and sue on principle and lose. But certain people who have been doing deals a long time want to get the reputation that, hey, we're going to sue, and you should know that. And when we sign a contract, we stand behind it. So again, it's just one of many strategic tools to put in your arsenal as you go through the business world making deals.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, Aaron, I want to say when we start rounding out this podcast, we really appreciate you coming on and giving us all of your knowledge and hopefully some facts and bits and pieces that people can take away from this podcast. So one of the questions that we normally typically use, because Raphael and I are both avid readers, more so he's audiobooks and I'm still traditional folding the pages here. But what is one of the most impactful books that you've ever read? And it doesn't have to pertain to commercial real estate or law or anything. It can be any genre out there that's maybe had an impact on your life.
Sure, great question. And there's so many. I'm also an avid reader. I consume a lot of books. So I love reading and audio and reading the physical books too. I will say I read a book last year, which I really thought was life-changing. It was incredible. It was called Into the Magic Shop by James Doty, who's a neurosurgeon. And it really delved into the mind. So on the surface, it was about meditation and how he achieved his goals through visualization and deep breathing and sort of mental health channels and awareness. But on a deeper level, it was very impactful because it really showed that the power of your mind is the greatest asset that you have. And if you can visualize it, you can achieve it. If you can believe it and have the conviction, you can achieve it. And I found it so inspiring. And I still think of it on a regular basis. I haven't picked it up in a while. I try to meditate, not so religiously. Sometimes I skip. It's very hard work, actually. But it was incredible for an entrepreneur to read a book like that and to recognize that, like you hinted at, Raphael, earlier, it's pretty much a mental game. 99% of what you're doing running a business is mental. And if you can add value to your greatest asset, which is your mind, and invest in your mental health, it's an unbelievable absolutely exponential return on your investment. So I really enjoyed that book.
Definitely. No, and I commend you on the meditation piece. I was in a pretty solid habit of meditation for several years, and I kind of fell off that recently. I'm trying to get back into the habit. But you're right. I mean, just sitting there in silence and letting your mind kind of just remain silent is one of the hardest things ever. I mean, you have, and especially with you being a busy entrepreneur, there's probably 50 different things you're thinking about in the morning. Oh, I got to do this. I got to do that. Oh, I got to, in your personal life, maybe you have kids and something else. So there's all these different stimuli that are coming at you. And it's almost one of the hardest things to just quiet that and say, okay, I'm taking 5 to 10 minutes for myself and just being here with my thoughts. And that's something. Yeah, it's amazing, man. It really is. I remember when I first started, I read this book called The Miracle Morning, and that's kind of what brought me to, try meditation out in my daily routine. And I did that for several years, and it took me a while to get to a point where I could quiet my mind. And it wasn't for a long time. It would be, I'd quiet my mind for a minute or two, and then it would just kick back on again. But it's that gradual progress over time that really makes a difference, though.
Yeah, and it's like the analogy for an airplane. If you're going through turbulence and whatnot, you got to get your own seatbelt on first. If your head is not in a good place, you can't be of help to anybody else. So you do need to take care of yourself, because it's easy to run yourself very ragged. And admittedly, there are many days where I just check the email right away and then I regret it. But hey, no one's perfect. We're just striving to build ourselves up better all the time and to keep moving forward.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. So again, Aaron, we greatly appreciate your time. I know you're super busy, and when we're looking forward to keeping in contact with you over time. One thing we like to ask near the end of the podcast is we have something called the Commercial Real Estate Treasure Chest. It's a repository of resources that we make available to our audience. And typically our guests contribute something to the treasure chest, whether it's a helpful PDF, Excel sheet, case study. We've had people contribute ebooks that they've written. So really anything that you think would be of value to the audience. So we just wanted to give you an opportunity. What are you willing to contribute today?
Absolutely. And I appreciate the opportunity. First of all, to be on your podcast, it's wonderful. And I really appreciate the time. And I think for a contribution, I'd love to provide a link to our podcast that we do here called The Dealmaker's Edge, where we interview a lot of up and coming entrepreneurs in commercial real estate. Some are clients of the firm, some are not, but friends in the industry who've done some fantastic things and the stories behind them. Hopefully your listeners would enjoy that too. And I'm sure our listeners would enjoy really learning about your podcast as well. And I really appreciate all the work you guys are doing.
Definitely. No, Aaron, I know our audience will gain some value from what you guys are offering on your end. So we'll go ahead and include that in the treasure chest. So definitely take a look at that as well. So Jeff.
Yep. Aaron, again, we really appreciate you coming on. It means a lot to us. You're taking your time out of your day and coming on our podcast. So I know other people are going to be interested. Just they can get in contact with you after they listen to this, especially. And what avenue would you like them to get in contact with you, or possibly your firm, or how would you want them to contact?
Sure, appreciate that, Jeff, and always happy to speak to anybody at any time that we could help in any way, shape, or form, whether it's legal or otherwise. Best way to get us is probably through our website, aystrauss.com, or my email, ays@aystrauss.com. You can find my full contact information on our website, learn about us there. And again, really appreciate the opportunity. It was really great to speak with you both today.
Oh, definitely. No, couldn't agree more. And we'll go ahead and include the links that he referenced in the show notes. So if you guys are watching this in a YouTube format, it's going to be in the description. If you guys are listening to podcast format, whether it's Apple, Spotify, etc., it'll be in the description as well. So again, thank you all so much for stopping by. If you guys are watching this in a YouTube format, we would greatly appreciate it if you could like and subscribe to this channel. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm and ensures more and more people can hear this message. If you guys are listening to this in the podcast format, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever, we would greatly appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star review. We've seen a significant uptick in our downloads as a result of you guys leaving a 5-star review. So if you don't mind going to Apple Podcasts, taking a second to leave us a 5-star review would mean the world to us, and we would greatly appreciate it. So thanks again so much for tuning in, and we'll see you all next time.